So we are very happy to welcome Franck Leibovici. Franck is an artist and is a poet, and this evening you're going to be talking to us about some of your projects from the perspective of co-production. In particular, one project that you've been working on for 7 years with the sociologist Julien Seroussi for the International Criminal Court in The Hague. A few words about your work. Much of your work is dialogical and collaborative, often taking the form of prompts and invitations to think otherwise about space, relationality, decision-making, and conflict. Your work is engaged by the same means, through the same processes with dissemination, circulation, as well as legacy. It draws from poetry, experimental music, dance, and conversation analysis, and makes use of notation systems which you develop in conversation with a multitude of interlocutors from a range of disciplinary fields. So in the 7 years you spent working with Julien Seroussi with and at the International Criminal Court, you developed what you called tools of art, which gain different meanings and different functions according to the spaces they are activated in. Your tools of art have been exhibited in museums and biennials, as well as activated in legal contexts, such as The Hague, the International Criminal Court, and in Kinshasa. And you have 2 books that give an account of those 2 devices, Bogoro from 2016 and Muzungu à la CPI from 2023, which is going to come out in English quite soon. Over to you, Franck.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you, Edgar, for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here today. It has been 10 years since the last talk I gave at Goldsmith, so I hope I'll come back before next decade. As you can hear, English is not my mother tongue, so I asked Anna if I should write down a proper paper and read it, and she said, no, please don't do that. It's better you improvise. So it's going to be more messy, and if you don't understand something I say, please interrupt me, and I will try to reformulate it. So I'm going to talk about a project tonight I've been developing with my friend Julien Seroussi at the International Criminal Court. And Edgar and Anna asked me to focus specifically on the logistical aspects, the co-production, the logistical, the economic, so not so much about the let's say the content, the storytelling, but more the process of making it. So we say with Anna and Edgar that I will try to talk during 45 minutes and then open it as early as possible to Q&A, so we can go more on your concerns. I will draw roughly the context of the project, and then I will try to raise the main issues of it. So my friend Julien used to work at the ICC as a legal officer. In fact, he was not really a legal officer, he was trained in sociology, but at the ICC the only position which exists with judges is legal officer. However, the judge president of the trial he was taking care of was a French judge. And the French system, the French legal system, is very different from the Anglo-Saxon system. Let's say that here you have what we call the common law system, where it's the parties, which means the prosecution and the defense teams, which are investigating on the field. And the judges are more like referees, and they listen to the narratives of the prosecutor and the narrative of the defense, and they decide. They try to get the truth beyond reasonable doubt. In France, it's very different. The judges study the case before the beginning of the trial, so they know very well the case before. In the common law system, the judges discover the case. They know nothing about the case before the first day of the trial. They know a little bit in a document called the document of confirmation of charges. It's about 40, 50 pages, and that's it. And the trial is going to last for 7, 8, 9 years. So they will discover during the hearings the case. In France, the judges know a lot before. And the French judge president for the first trial at the ICC, it was around 2008, 2009. As it was the first trial, he was not very self-confident. So he asked my friend Julien to become his legal assistant, even if he was not a lawyer. He was a sociologist. Julien had to swear that he knew nothing about the case. The trial was about crimes committed in East Democratic Republic of Congo, in the area of Ituri, near Uganda and Rwanda. And it was, let's say, a simple case. There was a village called Bogoro, where in the middle of there was a militia who set up its headquarters, and two militia's enemies decided to take control of this village because there was a headquarters of the enemy which was in the middle of it. The headquarters was in the school called the Institute, and because they wanted to attack the militia, they attacked the village, and all the inhabitants tried to seek refuge in the school, and everybody was killed. So the two militia leaders were accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Their name was Germain Katanga and Mathieu Ngudjolo. So it's a simple case, you see, at least at first sight. But Julien had to swear he knew nothing about Congo, he knew nothing about war in Africa, because if he knew anything before, he could have given information to the judges outside the courtroom, which is strictly forbidden. Because every drop of information judges get have to be during the hearings, so it can be challenged by the two parties. Every bit of information has to be questioned by the two parties. So if Julien knew anything outside the courtroom, he could say it to the ear of the judges, and it could be infringement of impartiality. So that's a little weird for a French guy. But anyway, he was living in The Hague, and he would come back every other week, and he would tell me the everyday stories of the hearing. And what happened was that at the ICC, so it was a very young institution, the ICC was created by the Rome Statutes in 1998, and it opened in 2002. And the first trial started in 2009. So it was the first trial, and it was a very young institution. The thing is that when you're a judge in your own society, you know the implicit, you know the context of your society. So it's easy to start with the common law system. When you work on an international scale, it's a little more tricky. What happened before in the history of international justice, it's not so many cases. You had the Nuremberg trial in 1945, but all the judges knew what a Nazi was. Most of them had a broad idea of what a Nazi looked like. Even for the ex-Yugoslavia, the judges knew what a Croat or a Serb was. For the cases at the ICC, none of the judges really knew the situation in East Congo. among the three judges who composed the chamber, you had one judge from Mali, one judge from France, and one judge from Belgium. But even the judge from Mali was not a specialist of Congo, of course. The second thing is that they are not experts of the field, but they never go on the field. They never put a feet in Congo before the trial or during the trial. Only at the end of the trial, they went there on the field to Bogoro, but it was an exception. Since this first trial, they never, for the other trials, they never went on the field. So there is a, let's say, time distance, because the trial happened many years after the crimes, a geographical distance, and a cultural distance. And what Julien told me was that there is a very strong legal construction during the trial. They invent a lot of law, but the factual basis is very small. The interesting thing is that when you study social sciences and you want to describe a situation, you try to be as precise as possible. You try to build as much as complexity as possible, to have the thinner description or the thicker description of the field. In the international justice context, you do the opposite. You try to get rid of as many facts as possible to get the most simple situation as possible. Because once you have a big solid fact, you can build on it. So that's what they tried to do. They said, okay, let's get rid of as many facts as possible. We keep just one big solid fact, and we will build the legal thinking of the trial on it. To give you one example, the prosecutor said, okay, let's try to avoid cultural trick or cultural traps. We're going to go on biological things. For instance, it is a war crime to use child soldiers. Child soldiers at the ICC is 1 year under 15 years old. So he said, okay, it's going to be easy. We're going to find 4 child soldiers or 3 child soldiers, and they will be the prosecutor witnesses. And since they can testify they were used as child soldiers, it will be a war crime. So the prosecutor introduced 3 or 4 child soldiers. And the first thing the defense team did was to show that the 4 child soldiers had 4 or 5 different birth dates. And all of the birth dates were real. It's not that 3 were fake birth dates. No, the 4 one. There was a birth certificate, the school certificate, the social security certificate. All of them were at different dates. And in some of them, they were 12 years old at the time of the battle. On others, they were 18. So if they were beyond 15, there were no child soldiers anymore, so there was no war crimes. So during the trial, all the background, all the, let's say, the floor, the ground, started to scramble. At some point, Julien and the judges started to ask witnesses about fetishers and magic and medicine men. And when they were asking witness if he was there on this very night, at this very corner of the street, he said, yeah, I was there, or if it was not me, it was my brother, but as my brother is not there anymore, I was the one who was there. So the judges started to get confused. That's what I was talking about cultural gaps. So when Julien was coming back to Paris and telling me these everyday hearings, I thought, there is something to investigate there. And when he told me that most of the material of evidence was public, which means the transcripts of all the hearings, the videos, the photos, the drawings, the documents, I thought, maybe we can do something there. So, the entry point of this project was that there is a moment at the end of the trial which is called deliberation. In fact, the deliberation is after every hearing, but at the end of the trial there is a big deliberation moment among the judges. And this moment is said to be at the discretion of judges, which means that there is no methodology to this moment. Judges can work however they want, which is not the case during the investigation. The investigation and the interrogations are submitted to very strict rules, but during the deliberation, which is a secret moment, nobody knows how the judges work, and they can work however they want. We said, if there is no methodology, so we can suggest to them new methodologies, and we can offer them, for instance, toolboxes or tools from the art, or from poetry, or from sound art, or from dance, or from social sciences. And why we thought that? Because we realized that in these new international justice trials, the material is mostly composed today with images, with films, with drawings, and judges are not trained with visual studies. When they do their law school, they read text, they absorb a lot of theory, of legal theory, but they are not trained to look at thousands of hours of videos, dozens of thousands of images taken with cell phones, to listen to hours and hours of audio recordings. And us, in art, in poetry, in sound art, we are trained for that. We are used to that. We do that every day. So we thought maybe we have some tools that we could offer them, or we could build with them. Because one important thing is that with this material, and I'm going to show you the kind of materials the judges are working with, it's, of course, the mission is huge. The International Criminal Court is working with immense stakes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, genocides. But the material they were working with for this field in Bogoro, in east of Congo, was very fragile. For instance, this is a simple map of the area, that's where the village is. But when they were asking more precise map, this is what they got. There was no Google map of the area. So they have been asking for years official map of the area. At the end, they were forced to ask witnesses to draw a sketch of the village and the surrounding. And when they ask witnesses to draw a map of the militia camp, this is what they got. So you see the distance between the importance of the court and the fragility of the material judges had to work with. And they have no choice, they have to deal with that. So we realize that in front of an image, depending on your disciplinary field, you will describe the image a different way. If you're a judge, if you're a lawyer, if you're a historian, if you're an artist, if you're an anthropologist, you will produce different descriptions. That's what we call professional visions. The more you gather professional visions, the richest you will get about the description of the image. So our idea was not to turn judges into artists or into art historians or into anthropologists. It was just to provide them toolbox from different fields. And for that, we thought, okay, we are not going to make a lecture to the judges at the ICC. They won't attend it and they won't absorb. I mean, you need to study years and years to become an anthropologist or to become a poet or whatever. So what we're going to do is we're going to build material devices that we call tools of art, which in a museal context or art context functions like an artwork, and in a professional context, like at the ICC, function as a tool of analysis, which allows them to process things. So you have a lot of examples in art history of exhibition display, for instance, that could be used in a very opportunistic way as a machine to process data. I guess a lot of them have heard of Aby Warburg, Mnemosyne. Like this, he was an art historian in the 20s, and he was the first one who wrote an art history, without writing one sentence. He just made a montage of images, and he wanted to study the evolution, the transformation of a pathetic form from the antiquity, from the Latin and Greek period to the Florentine Renaissance. And for that, he gathered a collection of images, and on blackboards, he did this kind of montage. That could be an exhibition display that the judges could use in order to arrange or organize all the images they had to deal with in a trial. Another example would be the Russian El Lisitsky. It was a display he did in the 20s in Stuttgart, in a venue called Film und Foto. And you can see that you have the two big machines are video projectors, are film projectors. Then on the wall you have photograms, which are a way to slow down the moving image. And on the top you have zoom of bigger image. So you have three types of way of processing the same film, the same images. That could be another way to deal with the films as evidence. Another example was Charles and Ray Eames at the end of the 50s at Universal Exhibition. They were the first one who used multi-projection, a sort of slideshow where they would show the different landscapes of the US. It was in Moscow. So we said, okay, we have in art history, we have full of examples of displays that could be useful for lawyers. So we decided to turn some of these examples in a, let's say, IKEA catalog. That would be the Aby Warburg displays, boards. That would be the floor plan if you want to do your own El Lisitsky at home. How many pieces of wood you would need. That would be the 7 screen for the video projection. So it's a sort of do-it-yourself. We started like that. And then we said, okay, we have to do things even more in a more simple way. So that's, for example, a map of the area. At the center, in orange, you see the village Bogoro. And the Bogoro is controlled by the militia called UPC from Ema ethnie, Ema group. And they were attacked by the Lendu group, the FRPI militia, and the FNI militia. So with the color coding, it's very easy to understand the situation. We said, okay, what if we just color code all the evidence? Judges work with the A4 format on their desk, and they just print evidence on A4 on piece of paper like that, and they put it in folders. And over the years, the folders, the binders are piled up on the desk. So after 7 years, you have like binders. When you have to go back at the end to write down the judgment, you have to reopen all the binders. And it's not the simplest way. Or you have to scroll down your JPEGs on your screen. So we said, okay, let's try to find another way. For instance, if we color code and if we put little tags on white stickers, maybe they can produce a lexicon with keywords, with tags, and that could be a way to navigate through the material in order to invent new circulations through the material. So you see, it's very simple, it's very fragile, it's very low-tech, but it's something, once they start to use this method or these little tricks, not starting from big statements, from ideological or political statements, but just from the everyday practice, it starts to change the way they deal with images or with the material. So our goal was to try to transform just a little bit, not the mentality, not the statements, but the everyday practice, the bureaucratic practice, the one which seems to be neutral. Because for the judges, the writing devices, the technology of sorting out the material is neutral. In poetry, it's everything but neutral. So we said, okay, let's try to work on a infra-legal level, because if it tackles a legal level, we're going to be blocked. So we need to appear to be unharmful as possible. We work with pens, with colors, with magnets, with cheap things, bureaucratic things. The idea, in order to create a little contrast, since we are in Goldsmiths, and since I know you have a big tradition with a program called Forensic Architecture here, one thing is I want to underline a little bit is that we don't try to produce a counter-narrative or a counter-investigation. It's more like to broaden the toolbox of the professionals. They are used to work with legal tools, and we try to have them a wider toolbox with tools coming from art or from poetry, etc., etc. But it's the same person who will work with these kind of tools. So, in order to produce these tools of art, of course, I could not do that myself in my studio in Paris. I had to collaborate with the staff at the ICC. And it's a very interesting situation because, of course, the staff of the ICC knows much better than either Julien or I about their practice. They are the most knowledgeable person about themselves and about their job. But we have a freedom they don't have, because in their job description, there is nowhere where it's written that they should invent new tools. But it's interesting also because it makes very clear that there is a non-symmetrical situation. Usually in the art field, in the art world, when an artist do an exhibition or do a talk in front of an audience, the audience considers that the artist knows more about his work. So the audience trusts the artist. In this situation of collaboration, that's the opposite. The audience knows much more than the artist. So you have to be very careful, because if you say nonsense or if you pronounce errors, suddenly you're not reliable anymore, instantly. And that's true with the judges of the ICC, but that's true also with the concerned communities. when we had showed these tools of art in Congo, in Kinshasa, the concerned communities knows much better even than the judges the situation they have experienced with the war. So if you're not as precise as possible about the facts you're describing, you're screwed. So this is very unusual in the art field because you don't have this relaxing position where everything you say will be trusted by the audience because you're the artist. You're in a very fragile position of everything you say is going to be scrutinized by the audience, by your public, the judges, the affected group, communities, etc. There is a second unusual features of this kind of work is a sort of new responsibility. When we developed these tools of art, we managed to have some hidden facts or latent facts, or let's say facts which had not been focused on really during the trial. We had them very visible. And one of these examples was that, for instance, one of our device was to show that some of the information which was considered as confidential, because it was a question of protecting the identity of the witnesses, well, some of this information was made public. Not intentionally, but I told you that the child soldiers, the witnesses, had 4 different birth dates. 2 of the birth dates were confidential, and 2 of the birth dates were made public. Of course, in a 7 years long trial, in a 35,000 pages of hearings, it's totally invisible. Who reads but poets 35,000 pages of PDF? Nobody. But with our tools, we were able to gather, to connect different dots and to make appear these inconsistency or these fragilities of the system of confidentiality. It's a responsibility because should we make it public? If we make it public, then maybe there is a risk for the life of the witnesses. So it's a new responsibility because usually in the art world, when we do something, let's call it political, what do we risk really? Maybe the sale won't be as good in a commercial gallery, or the symbolic reputation will be maybe damaged with a bad art critic paper, but nothing more than that. Here, the consequences must be much harder with the death of somebody. So we have to think twice in the way we make these works, these artworks public. So I would like to show you quickly now some of the tools of art we developed. One is called Rashomon effect. Rashomon is coming from the title of a Kurosawa movie. It was a simple story. There was a crime, 1 judge, 4 witnesses. The 4 witnesses were asked to describe the crime scene, and the judge got 4 different descriptions, and none of them fit with each other. How do we know which one is the right one? Most of the time it's impossible to know which description is the true one. And that's the situation in this kind of international trial. You had hundreds of witnesses, they all produce a different description of the event. For instance, if you ask the witnesses, when did the attack of the village happen? The first witness will tell you 4 o'clock in the morning, the second one 5 o'clock, the third one 8 o'clock, the fourth one at noon, in the end of the afternoon, in the evening. It's impossible to know. So what we did is that we noticed that the judges were working one witness after one witness, one after the other. And they were assessing the credibility for each witness, one after the other. But they never gathered around one topic all the witnesses, all the testimonies. So for instance, if you take the time of the attack of the village and you gather the different testimonies, you will see the different versions of all the different narratives. And we use the color code. When it's green, it's a credible witness. When it's red, it's a non-credible witness. When it's blue, it's doubtful. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not true. When different people produce the same statement, we put them together. So when you have different strings with the same paper, with the same statement, it means that you have different witnesses, more or less saying the same thing. The device is interesting when you notice that for a topic, you have, for instance, at the bottom right, different colors for the same statement. It means that a non-credible witness says the same thing that a credible witness. So we are moving the scale. We don't focus anymore on the credibility of the witness. We focus on the reliability of the statement. Maybe a credible witness and a non-credible witness are saying the same thing, but it makes the statements more reliable. So suddenly, with this very simple tool, the judges are able to sculpt into the statements. Because until then, when they would consider a witness is not credible, they would erase, they would delete the testimony. Say, okay, it's not credible. Now, with this kind of system, they can say, okay, the whole witness is not credible, but on this specific topic, what he says can be considered as reliable because other credible witnesses are saying the same thing. You see, it's very simple. It's color strings and nails. Of course, we're not going to ask the judges to nail in their desk things like that. They can do it with a post-it or with highlighters. But we notice one thing also is that the materiality of the artworks plays a big role for them. They told us that if we had done that in a data visualization fashion, let's say on a screen with InDesign or Illustrator software, they would not have been as interested because it would have been a graphic representation they are more used to, while when there is a materiality and they think they are more attracted because they find an aesthetic aspect to the artifact. They are not saying it's beautiful or something, it's just different in terms of desire to use the instrument. I go a little faster. Another way to show you how easy it's to process in a different way the material of evidence. We decided, as I told you at the beginning, to color code evidence. For instance, we said, okay, what if green was a military chain of command? What if blue was a political chain of command? What if pink was the medicine man chain of command? Suddenly, in the letters, we realized that the medicine man and the military chain of command were put together. We did the same on the drawing, and we saw that in this militia camp, we had, you see the pink? It's the house of the medicine man inside the militia camp. So we suggested them to color code all evidence and to use magnetic paint and to put magnetic paint on large walls and to put all evidence, all the exhibits of the trial on a large wall and to use magnetic board to do like in the Abbey Warburg fashion, like I show you, little arrangement. And this way they could connect evidence that were very far from each other in the plastic binders. Because chronologically speaking, there was no reason to put this evidence together. But because of the color coding or the tagging on the white stickers, suddenly they would have an overview, a synoptic view of all the evidence on a 10 meters long wall, and they could pick up some of them and rearrange them on the magnetic board. It's very low-tech, you see, nothing very complicated. So this is at the Taipei biennale. That it was during COVID, so that's why visitors have that. Because I come from art and my funding comes from the art world. So during these 7 years, every time I had an invitation for an exhibition or for a project, I would use this project to build a prototype. And once the prototype would be built, we would show it to the judges at the ICC, and we would have a conversation to see if it worked for them, if they think it's interesting or not, what they would change in order to have it more useful. But I always try to not disconnect the art world or the poetry world where I come from and the legal world where the instruments have to be used. So that's another tool in order to show the legal reasoning. I go fast, maybe we can go back during the Q&A on it. I would like to describe one last example. It's about the stamps at the bottom of the document. The judges were totally lost about the understanding of the militias of the area, because the militias were splitting every other week, and every other week you had new militias and ancient militias were disappearing. Judges used to say that usually you explain something from its context, but now there the context was changing more quickly than the thing itself. So we said, okay, how could we grasp this history of the militia? And we said, what about focusing on the stamps? Because the first thing a militia does when it creates itself is to have a stamp. It's a sign of authority. So we gathered them, and you had things like that. So immediately you can see that the lion at the top is a stamp of the official Congolese army. And you see that next to it, on the right, you have a sort of lion, which is between a lion and a cat. And it's the militia of the FRPI which attacked the village of Bogoro. You see immediately that they try to align with the official army, but not exactly in a very orthodox way. But you see that there is a relationship. So that's the first thing. You can work on the visual information that is usually discarded by judges who are not trained in visual culture. But we said, it's not enough. What if we try to build in 3D volumes the stamps in a bigger scale, like sculptures? So that's why that's what we did. And once we started to build them, there were some production basic questions which were raised. Okay, like, who did the stamp? In which material? When were they produced? That's at the ICC. All the questions of production that every artist is used to ask every time they make an artifact, they make an object. But judges never ask these production questions. In order to do that, we had to go through again the 35,000 pages of hearings. And then we found an excerpt where the production of the stamps was described. One of the guys of the militias said, well, we were walking by night in the mountain and we met an old craftsman and he had a knife and we asked him to make us a stamp. His name was Bernard. Okay. The interesting thing is that the moment when the stamp was created, was produced, was made, was before the creation of the militia itself. Like if the stamp had created the militia. You could consider that as a funny fact, but legally speaking, it was very important because one of the two accused, Mathieu Ngujolo, was accused to be the leader of one of the two militias during the attack of the village. But if the militia was not created yet at the time of the village, he was not able to be the leader of the militia since it was not created. So all the charges were collapsing. Why this example was very important for us? You see, I'm not asking you to consider the stamps or the sculptures as beautiful sculptures. The interesting thing is that in order to produce them, we had to ask questions, simple questions from the art field, which are not obvious questions from the legal field. And that was, in fact, what we were considering as the role of art as an action tool. Art at the ICC was not a way to represent things. You know, like historical painting, we're going to paint the Battle of Waterloo, where Napoleon lost. No. And you will see how the soldiers were killed, or there were misery, etc., etc. No, we are not trying to represent things. Art in a professional field like the ICC is a detour. It forces us to ask questions we would not have asked if we were not doing this detour by production. I got this idea from a science studies paper by Michael Lynch, who's an American anthropologist, and he had this example from a nano chemistry laboratory. He was studying these nanotechnologies in a lab, very well funded, very rich lab. I think it was in MIT or Massachusetts. And he was puzzled because 4 or 5 of the most famous scholars of this lab were spending hours and hours trying to build the best nano SUV for nano SUV competitions. So he did not understand. He thought he was in a serious lab, spending millions and millions about nanoscale or nanotechnology, and what he could observe was scholars trying to build the best nano SUV for a race competition of a nano SUV. So at some point he went to them, he said, guys, could you explain me what you're doing? Because it's very different from what I was expecting from you. And the scholars look at him and said, don't you understand? It's obvious. We raised situated questions. If we were thinking about the nano rules at the scale of the nano universe, we would raise only general questions, abstract questions. When we build nano SUV, we have to deal with concrete issues. For instance, how to have the nano wheels of our nano SUV adherent with a nano road, which means what kind of biosynthesis we have, or biochemistry we have to produce in order to have the wheels able to run on the road, to adhere, but not to be stuck. What is the level of adhesion, of adherency? Adhesion on the road. Another question could be, okay, we have to put some gas in the nano SUV. What kind of gas or what kind of fuel we have to put in this nano car in order to have the engine moving? Well, if we don't build a nano SUV, we never think about these questions. So when I read this paper, I said, oh, that's genius. That's exactly the role of art in another context of the art world. Art is not there as a representation. It's there to force us to raise questions that nobody would have raised before that. And the description of the production of these artworks, of these tools of art, are called rendering. Because once you start to describe step by step the process you have to follow, well, you're just describing the process of a project or the process of the change of a practice. So I will wrap it now. There is one big issue at the end of this project. I would say today in the contemporary art world, it's, I wouldn't say easy, but it's feasible to penetrate any world. If you work on it a little bit, you can get into Westminster, you can get into a scientific lab, you can get to the ICC, you can get everywhere as an artist. It's not the point anymore. The point is, when you develop a project like this, how do you deal with the maintenance, the sustainability? Because this kind of project is supported by the artist at the beginning. What happens when the artist decides to leave the institution? Because I don't want to dedicate my whole life at the ICC. 7 years is enough. But what happens if I leave? So you have different questions. In every institution, you have a turnover of people. People don't work at the same place forever in their whole life. It doesn't happen very often anymore that somebody spends 45 years or 40 years of their life in the same institution. So you're developing relationships or contacts with some people, but then they leave. Either they go to another institution, or they get retired, or they decide to change their life. And so all the knowledge, all the culture, all the routine you have developed with them is sort of lost. Also the practices inside the institution are evolving. Judges don't judge the same way today than they used to judge 10 years ago or 20 years ago. Of course, practices keep evolving. So how do you keep track of this evolution? And then you have the question also of the financing, because I was using the budget of exhibition production to produce the prototypes, but I don't know any museum or any galleries who would be willing to fund a long-term project beyond the scale of an exhibition or beyond a residency. I know a lot of universities who can find some money for a symposium, but they don't want to fund a project outside the university. And the ICC is a not very rich institution, and they have a lot of money to spend on investigations and on trials and on witness security, and they have no money to fund art project. So once this small project is over, who will fund it? So it appears for me that there are two major issues. The first one is that for this kind of collaborative projects, you need every time to create a post hoc micro platform, post hoc micro institution. Post hoc means that it cannot be a general model applied to that location. It has to be built from the field itself. And it's post because you cannot create it before. It has to be created after, once you have the features of the device, of the system. The second thing is that you have to create a culture in order to set up routine, which means that it's important not only to import a device, a tool of art, an instrument, but you have also to train people to use it and to change it. You have to share the authorship. They have to be able to have it evolving through years and to be responsible for it, which means that you have to sediment these new practices inside the institution, so that even if the staff members are leaving the institution, something remains, and you can share the memory of this movement, of these gestures. And I think that's the most difficult thing for this kind of project. How you implement the new practices among the group you're dealing with. I think I will stop for now, and maybe with Anna and Edgar we can go to questions.